Hello everybody, I'm Seibenlore, and today I want to share with you some of my fancy speculations regarding Magic Origins. If you're not aware, Magic Origins is the upcoming set following Dragons of Tarkir, and you can look at it as the functional replacement to the Magic Core sets. In this set, we, the players, are going to experience the backstories of 5 Planeswalkers who may be appearing in the next story arc involving Zendikar. These walkers will include Jace, Chandra, Nisa, Gideon, and Liliana. We'll get an in-depth look at their origins and the events which led to their Planeswalker sparks igniting. For a lore nerd like me, this is of course going to be one of the best sets ever, because while we have the general knowledge of these characters' stories, there is still a lot to be discovered. For example, we just learned recently that Gideon was from the plane of Theros. Who knew? And with this set, we're going to see 5 new cards which represent the transitions of these characters to Planeswalkers. These cards will have a transform mechanic, similar to that found in some of the cards from the Innistrad block. They will start off as normal creatures, then some specific event will trigger and flip them to their Planeswalker forms. As interesting as this mechanic is to the actual game, I've also found it interesting from a lore standpoint. One of these flip Planeswalker cards has already been revealed, Liliana the Heretical Healer, and if this card stands as the standard for the rest, then we're in for some lore-rific cards. This card, including its pre-Planeswalker mechanics, just bleeds from Liliana's actual lore perfectly. She did start off as a healer, so the name and the lifelink is appropriate, but what causes her to flip, and what she gets when she does, is the real juicy bit. Like I said, these cards are trying to replicate the stories of how these characters ignited their sparks, and Liliana's ignited when she mistakenly used a potion on her sick brother which turned him into a zombie, so this card just reads so nicely from her lore. It takes the death of something that you have to flip her, and when she does, you get a zombie. It's just perfect. If you want to know the full story of Liliana Vess, you can check out my video on her here, but for now, I want to get into my own speculations for the other 4 Planeswalkers coming to this set. I want to explain their abilities and their flip triggers, and try to incorporate their lore as best as I can into these cards. Warning, I am not a professional card designer, nor do I understand how balancing works. These are just some of my ideas on how these characters' lore could impact their cards upon the release of Magic Origins. So let's start off with my ideas on Shaundra Nalaar, or rather starting off as Shaundra Stubborn Pyromancer. She enters as a 2/2 red creature for 2 red mana and 1 colorless, and she also has fire breathing. Whenever a creature you control becomes the target of an opponent's spell, exile Shaundra Stubborn Pyromancer, then return her to the battlefield transformed under her owner's control. If you do, deal 2 damage to all creatures. When flipped, she becomes the Planeswalker Shaundra Purifying Fire. She comes in with 3 loyalty counters, and her +1 ability allows you to draw a card and then discard a card. If a red instant or sorcery spell was discarded this way, deal 2 damage to target creature or player. Her -3 ability is destroy target non-legendary land. And her ultimate -5 ability is, you get an emblem with, whenever you cast a red instant or sorcery spell, copy that spell and choose a new target. Her pre-Planeswalker form's name is in reference to the fact that she grew up as a very wild and uncontrollable child with a fondness towards fire magic. Flipping Shaundra is triggered when herself or an ally is targeted by a hostile spell. This is related to the fact that Shaundra's spark ignited after she witnessed her family being burnt alive by an opposing force, and she was set to be executed. As she planeswalked for the first time, she disappeared in a plume of fire, so I found her flip effect of doing damage to everything fitting. Later on in her story, she went through an event known as the Purifying Fire, thus her Planeswalker name and abilities. If you want to know more about Shaundra's story, check out my full video on her here. Next, we have Gideon Jora, or in this case, Gideon Gang Leader, who enters the battlefield as a 1/4 for 2 white and 1 colorless mana and has Vigilance. Whenever a creature an opponent controls leaves play, if that creature's power was greater than Gideon Gang Leader, exile Gideon Gang Leader, then return him to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control. If you do, creatures you control get +1/+1. When he transforms, he becomes the Planeswalker Gideon Heromancer, who comes into play with 3 loyalty counters. His +3 ability allows target creature to gain +0/+2 and Vigilance until end of turn. His 0 cost ability is, until end of turn, Gideon becomes an indestructible human soldier whose power and toughness is equal to the number of creatures you control. And his -12 ultimate ability is, you get an emblem with creatures you control are indestructible. The name Gideon Gang Leader is referencing the fact that in his story, Gideon was actually a misplaced youth who eventually fell into a gang. He later became the leader of this gang and changed their operation towards stealing from the rich so that they could give back to the poor, in this case, in the form of 1/1 counters. Later he was captured and began training with a master of hieromancy, which is the magic of order. He soon became quite skilled and eventually defeated an opponent who seemed far superior to him. This victory seemed so unbelievable that he actually reached enlightenment, causing his spark to ignite. This is mirrored by how this card flips, requiring the death of an opponent's creature which is stronger than Gideon. When Gideon planeswalked, he quickly returned and his master proclaimed him the second greatest hieromancer he had ever seen. He gifted him with his iconic whip weapon known as a Surl, and he became the symbol of order, which I believe is represented in this planeswalker's name and abilities. Moving on, let's look at Nisa Ravain, or rather, Nisa Joraga Exile, who enters the battlefield as a 1/3 for 2 green and 1 colorless mana. She also has Landfall, giving her +2/+2 until end of turn. Whenever you play a green instant or sorcery spell, exile Nisa Joraga Exile, then return her to the battlefield transformed under her owner's control. If you do, summon 2 1/1 elves. When she's transformed, she becomes the Planeswalker Nisa Nature's Champion, who comes into play with 3 loyalty counters. Her +2 ability is untap 2 target forests. Her -1 ability is summon an elf whose power and toughness is equal to the number of untapped forests you control. And her -8 ultimate ability is you get an emblem with, whenever a forest you control becomes tapped, summon a 1/1 elf. So Nisa's story is a bit of a mystery, one I hope is explained more thoroughly in Magic Origins. I'm not sure exactly how her spark ignited, only that it did so when she was very young, so take this card's abilities with a grain of salt. Her name, Nisa Joraga Exile, references that she was exiled from her elvish tribe when she started to explore different ways of life. This went against her tribe's traditional elvish superiority and xenophobic mindset, and so they kicked her out. Her landfall ability is linked to her strong connection to nature and her nature magic, and basically I wanted to pay homage to her Zendikarian roots. Since she is a nature mage, I figured the casting of nature spells would be a good trigger point. Also playing on the fact that she believes elves are the greatest race in the multiverse, her summoning more of her kind seems legit when she flips. Her Planeswalker form, Nisa Nature's Champion, is more in line with how the story on Zendikar may go in the upcoming set. Nisa has increased her nature magic significantly and can now bend mana to her will. She uses this to surround herself with more elves and buff them up. Finally, we have Jace Beleren, or his younger form, Jace Apprentice of Alhammarat, who enters the battlefield as a 2/3 for 2 blue and 1 colorless mana. Whenever you draw a card, target opponent removes the top 2 cards of their library and puts them into their graveyard. Whenever a non-creature spell or land an opponent controls enters the graveyard, exile Jace, Apprentice of Alhammarat, then return him to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control. If you do, draw a card. When flipped, he becomes the Planeswalker Jace, Forgotten Memory, who comes into play with 3 loyalty counters. His +2 ability is each player draws a card. His 0 cost ability is look at target opponent's hand. And his -7 ultimate ability is you get an emblem with, whenever you draw a card, draw 2 cards instead. His pre-Planeswalker form pays tribute to this character's lore when referencing the mage he apprenticed under, Alhammarat. He trained Jace in the field of mind magic and telepathy, honing his skills in manipulation and illusions. His spark ignited when he uncovered a lie between his master and his father, keeping him from the truth about his planeswalking abilities. This is displayed in the fact that he causes an opponent to mill until you uncover a specific card which causes him to flip. His Planeswalker name, Jace Forgotten Memory, references the fact that he actually erased his own memory. He did this because, out of anger for his master's betrayal, he killed Alhammarat and he no longer wanted to live with that burden. He may be no Jace the Mind Sculptor, but I feel like his abilities and triggers fit well with his story. If you want to know more about his lore, you can check out my full video on Jace Beleren here. So, there you go guys, my speculations for the 4 yet to be released Flip Planeswalker cards coming in Magic Origins. Like I said earlier, I am by no means an authority on card mechanics or design, so don't take these theoretical cards too seriously. Also, we could see changes in some elements of these characters' stories with the release of Magic Origins, so even their lore may be a little spotty. I hope I captured the feel of these cards in regards to their lore, and I believe these are actually very close to what the cards may be when announced, but really, who knows? I really want to know what you guys think about these cards I've made. Do you think they could represent these characters well? How would you alter them to better fit the character's lore, or to make them more viable for real play? Let me know all that in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It really goes a long way in supporting future content. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.